nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, plus some fun bits where we talk to professionals and ask them about how they use data to basically solve the world's problems. So today we have Steven Johnson, and he is a data community advocate at Shipyard. Hey, Steven.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So to kick us off, how about you tell us about yourself? Tell us your origin story, your background, and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. It's been an interesting journey for sure. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, as you can tell from my Grand Ole Opry background. Actually recording from there. I'm just kidding. That's unfortunately not true. But I'm from Nashville, and then went to college the first go around to be a high school math teacher. And I did that for 4 years and realized that probably wasn't the best future plan for me for numerous reasons that we'll have to do a second podcast about at some point, I'm sure. But so I went back to college probably around 2.5 years ago for an analytics degree. And so that kind of kicked off the data side of things. And since then, I've worked as a BI analyst at a lumber company, worked as a data scientist at a nonprofit, and now I've landed at Shipyards as a data community advocate. So it's been an interesting journey. And, as a data community advocate, I get to, kind of flex both the data side, all the programming, all the vendors, all the software, and then also get to kind of flex the teaching background as well and get to create content that's educational in nature. And I think, I can do a pretty good job at that. Just, going back to, it's the same thing as teaching the Pythagorean theorem, right? It's just how to use an API instead, right?
Exactly. I was going to say, with that math teaching background, how was that transition into data? Do you think it was maybe easier than most, or maybe it was a little bit harder because you're kind of really deep into the weeds, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, and I remember whenever I applied to the analytics program that I went to at Alabama, I remember I went and talked to the head of the program, and I was like, hey, I don't know anything about business, and I don't really know anything about data or analytics, but he's like, but you do know math, which is obviously a plus. And it was easy. It was easy on the front end to learn the material, because really I knew the math and I knew the statistics background I needed to excel. But what was really troublesome, and I don't know that we're out of that period yet, is, after I graduated my degree, we were right in the heat of COVID. And so there wasn't many jobs, and the jobs that were out there, I was competing with people that had 3, 4, 5 years of experience that had been laid off. And it's still something that I see, on LinkedIn currently, is obviously there's people being laid off from jobs, but you see a lot of people trying to switch careers, whether that be from teaching or some other field similar to that. And it's how do I make that jump from being a teacher to getting that career? And why is my resume with my 3, 4, 5 years of teaching experience better than someone's resume that maybe was a general business person, or maybe they're just coming straight out of college and they don't have any formal work experience, but why is my resume better than theirs? Which was a tough thing to try to prove out.
Exactly. I was just going to ask, how did that change the way that you interviewed and kind of marketed those transferable skills in an interview?
Yeah, and that's what was even tougher about it, is as a math teacher, you're the hot commodity, right? Every school in the country needs quality math and science teachers that have, actual training in those fields. So I never had to interview as a teacher, right? Most of the time I'd walk into a principal's office and they'd be like, "Oh, you can teach math? Yeah, you got the job. When can you start? Do you want to coach? Do you want to do club? Whatever you want to do, it's fine. You can teach math." But then I had to start trying to interview. And, I posted this on LinkedIn a while ago, but I probably applied for 100 spots before I even got an interview. And, and then once I got the interviews, they weren't going great either, because I had no interview skills. So I remember I sat down with one of my professors at college, and she told me what I just said is you have to figure out how you can spin that teaching experience into a positive in the job search versus just being there. And the way I started to do that was, I was able to communicate with people that I'm able to convey information to people that are less technical much better than anyone else can.
Mhm.
And that's something I've been able to leverage in the jobs that I've had is, generally I interview and they're like, yeah, well, we don't really think that you have the skills to do this job. Like, we don't think you're the best qualified technical skills person, but you do have some skills that we can't teach you, right? Like the way that I can communicate with people and the way that I can convey information that's almost something you can't teach. And you definitely can't teach it kind of in a business setting. I don't think like that's something that I learned a lot as a teacher in my 4 years of going to school as a teacher that, like we learned how to convey information, like hard information to people in not a hard way. And so once I was able to start communicating that with people, I think that's what kind of gave me the, like, let me get over the hump to actually get a job, which, is that first, once you get the first job and get some experience, then it becomes a little bit easier, right? Like the ball starts rolling down the hill a little bit. But that first one was tough.
Yeah, that's a good point in that those soft skills are much harder to learn and, become an expert at than the technical business skills, which you can just on the job training type thing or take a course.
Yeah. And it's like and that's something I've seen in business so far. I mean, I've only been in the industry for like 2 or 3 years now. So I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but that's something I've seen in the industry so far is you have these like very technical data people that are very, very good at their job. Like they're way better than I am at my job. Like data engineers, data scientists, analysts that are working with dashboards and things like that. Like these people are creating great products and they're doing everything extremely well. But then there's this huge gap between these great data products that people are putting out and then the people that are actually going to use them and the stakeholders in the business. And there's always like this like communication gap between those two parties. So it's like this great, dashboard or this great, tool is out there, but then the stakeholders aren't using it because there's just such a gap there. And that's what, like in my very first job that I had as a BI analyst, like it got to the point where like the stakeholders were like, nah, we just give us the data in a spreadsheet. We don't want your dashboards. And it was so heartbreaking, but it was a good learning moment for me because I had to learn that it's not just about doing your job. You have to then sell your work to your own company, which to me at the time was just like this mind-blowing thing that like, why, like we're all working in the same company. We're all should be on the same team. Why am I having to like pitch my work to you? But that's a big part of it,
Exactly. And isn't it crazy how when you're pitching that, you have to speak kind of two languages, your data technical language and then that business language. So it's kind of a cool place to be.
Yeah. And if you don't find the right mix of those two things, you can either go too technical and then everyone's falling asleep during your presentation, or you don't go technical enough and they're like, oh, well, this is too simple. Like we'd rather just keep doing what we're doing in the past. So it's a scary cliff to be on for sure.
Absolutely. Definitely a delicate balance in why knowing your audience is really critical, because some people, when you're speaking to them, want to get into the weeds, want those details, whereas others, they'll start falling asleep if you say, the average.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. So tell us more about your role as a data community advocate. Like, what are your main roles and responsibilities?
Yeah. And so I just going back to Coalesce a few months ago, I remember there was a talk by Steve. I think his name is Stephen Bailey. That could be completely wrong. I hope not. I think that's right. I should have take notes on that. But he had this talk about being a data generalist, right? And how he feels like he excels in roles that aren't very defined. And they're just, different things are going to come at you. And you just have to be flexible enough to like do that. And that's basically what being a data community advocate is, at least at Shipyard. It's hard to say because I think it's a newer kind of role title that's out there. But kind of what I do on a normal basis is I put out a lot of content for Shipyard. So for those of you that are not aware of Shipyard, we're an orchestration tool. And so I put out a lot of content on our YouTube page that's showing kind of how to do A to B. So how to connect 5 TransDBT clouds or something like that. And, just making these 4 to 5 minute videos and putting them out there just so that content's out there for the community. And then I work a lot of marketing. So like I manage our LinkedIn, I manage our Twitter accounts, I manage that side of things, which is stressful a lot of the times because I have no marketing background, but we learn as we go. Right. And so we do things like that. And then, I also help customers as they come in and do demos and things like that to prospective customers. So those are always fun to kind of show people what Shipyard can do in a demo situation. And then like once they're a customer, that's where my background I think really comes in, is I'm able to pull from my data science background or even the BI analyst side that I did for a while, and I can help them with those different tools and help them get set up to do what they want to do. And then lastly, there's obviously like the community part of it, which my boss likes to stress a lot because it's not my favorite part of the job. And it's not that it's not my favorite. I'm just not as good at it. But going out and talking on LinkedIn and posting and commenting, and then going in like the DBT Slack channel or the Local Optimistic Slack channel, and like putting yourself out there as a community member. I'm more of a lurker by nature. I obviously have Reddit and Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff, and I barely post anything, but I like to read and learn that way. So that's a big part of the job that I've been trying to stress this. We're 24 days into the year, but this year is trying to get out there and post more on LinkedIn and comment and share my experiences, because obviously I have a unique experience in the data field, coming from teaching into this, that I can share and hopefully help people out to find jobs and things like that as well. So
absolutely, a lot of people would definitely learn from your experiences, so please do share.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's always easier to say you're going to share than actually sharing, unfortunately. Like it's always like, oh, I can go into this conversation and talk, but then it's like, but there's like 30 other comments above me that have probably said something similar to what I'm going to say. So is it even worth me posting? But the answer to that question is generally always yes, because even if it's similar, it could be, it could be a little bit different, and you could give a small snippet, a small extra snippet that the other people didn't give. Yeah. Or, like we've all done this where we've asked a question on, some, either a text message chain or something to people. And, like if one person says yes, that means something. But then like if 30 people say yes, that's a bigger sign that the answer yes is probably right. So, that's the mental block that I have to work through on a daily basis, is like, in my head, like the pessimist in me is like, there's no point in posting on this because there's already been a conversation that's being had, and I'm not really going to add anything new to it. But like, even if it's something that's the same, it's still probably worth getting into the conversation just so you could add some reinforcement or, added strength to the conversation. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say you read my mind verbatim. I'm like, but if you say it and 10 other people say it, that just confirms the point.
Right.
And also, like, you always have a different perspective because of your background. Some little tiny piece could, change somebody's entire, perception of it.
Yeah. So it's, like I said, it's a delicate battle, and one that I deal with on a daily basis, but it gets easier as you do it, right? It's what I've learned as a person, as these habits that you want to form. They're always scary to start off, but then as you start doing it, like that's something we've done at Shipyard now, is, for the 2 or 3 of us that are more on the customer facing side, is we schedule 30 minutes a day on our calendar that it's like, you're just going to read social media. Like you're just going to go in LinkedIn. You're just going to go into Reddit. You're just going to go into these Slack channels. And whether you post or not, that's your own prerogative. But like, you're going to spend 30 minutes a day looking at it. So you can, not just post and comment and be a part of the community, but you can also still learn something there. Right. And see kind of what's hot in the industry, like what people are excited about. Like we've got, like we built some content, or I built some content on like Dolly whenever it came out, a few months ago, right? Like the photo imaging by or the photo generator by OpenAI, and that's like one of my most popular content pieces I've put out. And it was just like, we literally saw it on Reddit, and then they were like, hey, we can build something out for that. And so like, in Shipyard now, you can just go in there, click a button, type in your prompt, and it'll generate an image and send it to you. So like, it's it goes both ways, where it's like, we're trying to like put our names out there and be a part of the community more, but it's also like, hey, if we see something cool that we can quickly build something for, like, let's take advantage of that as well. So yeah,
Reddit's a great platform for ideas.
It's fair.
Whether it's gaining ideas from other people, or if it's just like you have a thought and you just like put it on some subreddit, you get tons of comments.
That might be the nicest description of Reddit you could possibly give it, right? It's a good place for ideas.
Yeah, that's true. I like to see the bright side of things.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. All right, so let's transition a little bit more into data specifically, and let us know, how do you define data and how do you use data to solve the world's problems?
Yeah, it's my career trajectory in the past 2.5 years has like made that question be really different, right? Like whenever I started off as a BI analyst, like I worked for this lumber company in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and like data was like these numbers that came from these like lumber machines, right? Like these, I didn't fit in very well there. I'm not a big outdoors guy, as you can tell. So like, they were like, hey, we can go like hunting together. And I'm like, no, we probably can't. I mean, we were all friends and like we all got along, but it was just like, there's obviously like there was camouflage being worn in the office, and like I don't own a piece of camouflage. But anyways, so like, at that point, like data was like, what can I pull from these lumber machines and then make dashboards, right? So like data ended up being these numbers, and then like what can I in these dashboards, right? And then I transitioned into a data science role at this nonprofit, and then like data like got a lot bigger, right? Because like you're looking at the whole organization, and data can end up being like this marketing data, right? With how many people are like looking at sites on your website, how many people are watching your videos, like how many people are responding to donation requests, like, and then obviously there's the operation side of things. There's like all this data that's there, and then now I'm at Shipyard, which is like an even more different experience, because like now I'm working on like the vendor side of things versus like an actual like building things for stakeholders. So now at Shipyard, we have our data, which is like, what are our customers doing with our product? What integrations and what vendors are people actually using more inside of our product? And then on top of that, we also have like, what are people doing in our product that's causing them issues, and how do we fix that? And then for me specifically, what I look at data the most is like, what are people looking at inside of our product, like on our website, that I can build content out for? So that, if they're looking at this web page, like they're obviously interested in whatever's on that web page, and we already have text and pictures and diagrams and all that stuff on there. But like, if I can also put a video on there, they're more likely going to come use Shipyard, because we have all of that there. And then on top of that, we also have all the data coming in from like, what are people Googling? Like, like what topics are people searching for in the data space in general, that we can also operate and execute on as well. So data it's like quite broadly defined term in my head at this point,
Yeah. Wow. Well, to go a little bit deeper into data and data analogies.
Yeah.
I understand that you're a gamer.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And you have the perfect data analogy for one of your favorite games.
Yeah. So listen, this is a nerd podcast, so we're going to really dig into it here.
Fun bits.
That's right. Yeah. So this is the fun bit / nerd part here. So we talked, Monica and I talked about, we talked about video games, and one of my favorite video games is StarCraft, which is a real-time strategy game that's made by Activision Blizzard, and Blizzard specifically. And it's been like this big strategy. It's been like the biggest strategy game in the world for, 20 to 30 years. I mean, it's the biggest player in the space. And what I've seen with StarCraft is super interesting is like, you have all this, like you have this professional scene of professional gaming that's like attached to StarCraft. And StarCraft is one of the first professional games to come out that people played professionally, especially in Korea, and then obviously across the world as well. But then you saw all these professional StarCraft players after they get, into their 30s, where they have a life and they can't play a video game for 12 hours a day, which like I understand, and it's really sad. Like I wish I could play video games for 12 hours a day again. But you see all these professionals that go and then like they go do these like crazy jobs afterwards, right? Like there's this big exodus of like StarCraft players that go play professional poker, which is this like super thought-provoking game, right?
Yep.
And you have to manage risk and things like that. And then like you see like, and then like a bunch of other ones are like going to be like, engineers and like work in the tech field. So like they're all like, so StarCraft is like this like thought experiment, and like I was thinking about how StarCraft could like play into the data field. And so if y'all just play with my analogy here, so StarCraft is this one versus one game where you start off with a base and workers, and you have to get resources to build buildings, to then build an army to attack your opponent. And I thought about that a lot, and I thought about how as a data team, we always either focus too much on two sides of things, whether it's the setup process, and like we all get bogged down on thinking like, oh, we have all these vendors and we have all this software that we can use to like do extraction, to do transformations, to do BI tools, to do reverse ETL, to do like there's just all these things out there, and like you get into this idea of like being in a lock of decisions because there's just too much out there. And it's the same thing in StarCraft, where it's like at some point you have to make a decision and go. But then you also have people on the other side of things that like have their tools and things set up, but then they can't execute the actual data. They can't execute on the actual data, right? So maybe you have a really strong data engineering team that's like doing that front end work, but then maybe you don't have a strong analyst team, or maybe you don't have any analysts at all. Like that's just something you're trying to get your stakeholders to do on that side. So then like you can't actually take action on that data. So like in StarCraft, it's the same kind of ideas where you have to kind of focus your energy on like, do you spend your attention on like building your base and building your resources up and building all that stuff? Like you can do that, but then if the other person attacks you early, you're dead because you haven't spent any time actually doing that on that side. Versus you can do it the other way and not spend any attention on building up your resources at the front end, and then the game goes long, and then you can't actually execute at the end of the game because you don't have any of your processes built up. And I thought like we see that in data teams all the time, where it's like some teams try to run before they walk. They're like, hey, like let's just buy Tableau, or let's buy Power BI, or like Looker or something like that, right? And they're like, oh, we can just export our data in there, and like we can do a little bit of cleaning in there, and then like make dashboards, and it'll be great. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but that's going to fail because you haven't done any front end work to show, like you don't have any of your schema set up, right? Like, and you don't have any defined way for your data to come in. Like they could be coming in like with CSVs or like Excel sheets or things like that, right? And so if you're trying to execute like quickly and like make dashboards and things like that, that will work for a short amount of time, but in the long run, if you're going to run into walls because you don't have any of the early part of your strategy defined. So it's just like, team members are just going to do whatever they want to get the data in there and then just hope it works, right? Mm-hmm. But then you also have teams that spends months, years, like working on all of the front end, right? Like they defining their Fivetran, like making their DBT cloud models, right? Like doing all that stuff and like just nitpicking it all, like, and it's like, oh, well, I wish I could make my star schema a little bit better, right? Like that field should probably go here. And then you argue about that for like 3 months. And I've done that many times in my past work life. That's why I can say that, right? Where you just like you battle for like months over like these small details that like probably don't matter in the long run, but like, so then you're so focused on the starting of your process that you never actually get the data to your stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So they can't actually take any action on it. So then you're dying on the front end. And I just thought like that works out so good for like a strategy game, because you have to make those decisions on where to go. And that's not even including like the fact that like the other guy on the other team can attack you.
Yeah.
And just break all your plans, right? And in data, that happens too, right? Where like something breaks and you're like, oh no, what do we do now? Or, your stakeholders ask for something different, or, someone leaves the team and you have to pivot. And so like, so I think the strategy gaming world and the data world are pretty much the same thing. Thinking about StarCraft and thinking about the data field, like, there's just so much to think about with video games that can apply to the data field and apply to life, that I think video games sometimes get a bad rep, that, people say they're a waste of time, and people say that, they're not, you should go outside and play football or basketball or baseball or something like that, right? That's usually the battle that happens, especially, as a teacher. I used to hear that all the time with, teachers would be like, why are they wasting their time playing Fortnite or Call of Duty or something like that, right? And, there is argument. We should go outside, right? Like we should definitely step outside every once in a while, right? Yeah, I think video games get a bad rep because, you get to build community through them, even if it's not like a thought-provoking game. But then there are games like StarCraft, or even games like chess, which I don't know if we call it a video game or not, but, if we do, we do, like, of games that are like thought provoking and allow you to like really train your mind to be thinking, and like they train you to like make sure you're thinking about what's happening in the next step, and and like allow you to quickly pivot whenever something changes in the game. And so I think that's, that's a skill that I bring into the data field, is, in my not very good life of playing StarCraft. But, like you have to be, like that's, it's allowed me to be quicker on my feet and allowed me to like, really think about the full process versus just like thinking about the small pieces of the process. Because like I said before, like, we see a lot of teams, especially at Shipyard, since we're an orchestration tool, we see a lot of teams that really focus on the BI layer or the extraction layer or the transformation layer. And if you're too focused on one part of it, the other parts are going to break that part down at some point down the road, right? At some point, it's going to fall apart,
What do you think about games like Minecraft? Like, that's creativity and strategy, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's my like fault as an individual and something I wish I was better at, but like I'm not very creative.
Okay.
And something I tell Blake, my boss, all the time, is I'm just like, hey man, like I have trouble coming up with ideas. But if you come up with the ideas for me, like I will execute on them and do them, right? And so, but yeah, I think that's where we can really, going back to education, like you see games like Minecraft, I think like even like on a smaller scale, like Roblox, which is like I think maybe the most popular game in the world. Like that, it's crazy how that is, but like, I see these kids in elementary school that are playing those two games, and it's like a lot of parents like look down on that, but like, and there's obviously not great aspects to games, and we won't get into all that, but like in games like Minecraft or Roblox, like we're allowing these kids an opportunity to like get into another world and be creative and like find out who they are as people too, right? Like they can build things out that they could never build out before, right? It's almost like whenever I was a kid and had Lincoln Logs.
Yes.
Like you could build things with Lincoln Logs, but like at some point you ran out of Lincoln Logs. Like, and you didn't have any more, and then you had to like go ask your parents to try to buy more Lincoln Logs, and they're like, no, we're not doing that, because then you're just going to have those logs sitting around the whole house. Or like you bought Legos, and like obviously Legos are crazy expensive, but like you always just wanted that cool set. But like now these, this next generation of kids like have Minecraft and games like that are like, they basically have infinite Legos.
Yeah,
and they can do whatever they want with it, and it's basically free. I mean, like you don't have to have a nice computer to play Minecraft. Like you can play it on like an Xbox 360.
Yeah.
But like we're basically giving these kids like unlimited pieces to build the world that they want to build, and that's super cool. And I imagine like whenever I was a kid, if I would have had things like that available to me, like my creative side probably would have been better, because like I just didn't have an outlet to be creative, right? Like whenever I was a kid, like I guess you could like try to like make music or like write, but like I'm not interested in that really, But like if I could like built a race car track on Roblox or Minecraft, like might have been interested, So
that I like that. I don't know if this is a relevant game anymore, but Scribblenauts, that'll increase your creativity.
Yeah, sure. So there's just so much. There's so much out there in the space that's not Fortnite or Call of Duty or. And like Fortnite, you get to build stuff too, right? Like you can still build things in Fortnite that is good as well. Like I'm not trashing those games by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the media and like parents like see kind of the Call of Duties and like the Grand Theft Autos of the world and things like that, and like, oh, games are bad. But it's like, I remember like whenever I was a kid, like we played it was all these games from like Jumpstart or something like that on the computer, and they were like these like very basic like math and reading comprehension games that my mom bought like on these like on there, and they're super old, but like I wasn't lucky enough to like get to go to like a nice preschool to like get that like early level, but like I played those games, and I think those games helped me to get the basic math knowledge I needed to like start school in a good spot. So there's a lot of positive there that we don't bring out, and I think that's partly gamers' fault in general. Like we kind of don't do a very good job of advertising the good part of games. I mean, like video games have only been around for less than 100 years, right? Since like I think Pong came out was the first one. I did a research project on that in college. I should know, but it's been a long time ago too. But like we're still less than 100 years into the industry, and like I don't think we know how to market them yet to like show the positive aspects of them versus the negative aspects that are obviously get news attention all the time. So yeah, hopefully that'll change at some point.
I agree. I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So key takeaway, you can learn from playing video games. And talking about learning other than from video games, Stephen, how do you learn new things?
Yeah. So that's been that was the part that whenever I took my job at Shipyard that I was both the most excited about and then like also the most terrified about is like at Shipyard, since we're an orchestration tool, like we want to be, and we're vendor agnostic. We like to say is, so we don't really care what you use. Like we want to be able to support you with whatever tool that you're using. So like, in my past experience in my 2 jobs before that, I used like Azure for like data warehousing and like Power BI for, BI tools. And then at my other job, I used BigQuery and then Power BI. So like I had a little bit of experience in those, and then but then there's like so much out there. Like there's so much out there. And so a big part of my job is like going and learning these tools. And so like what a lot of what I do is I'll just, thankfully a lot of tools give us like a trial account to, work on it so we can help our customers out. But a lot of times it's just jumping in and playing with it. I'm a hands-on learner a lot of the time. So like I like to just jump in and just play around and see, and then obviously reading the documentation to an extent. I mean, I don't like reading documentation. I feel like I'm similar to your husband. Like he, I do write some documentation and whatnot, but I just don't feel like it's not interesting. I mean, it's obviously relevant. Like we need it in the world, right? Like it is an obvious need in the industry, but like, I don't think anyone learns that well from documentation. There's better ways of doing it. So like,
it's definitely harder for me as well.
So like there's people like obviously there's people out there that make YouTube videos that help out with learning, like so being a good Googler helps out, like and finding, because I think that's maybe the biggest challenge I have with learning is like sometimes I know what I want to know, but I don't know how to ask the question to figure it out, right? So it's like I know what I want to do, or like I know where I need to go, but I don't know the right words to ask the right question. Which I think can be really tough because I get stuck sometimes because I'm like trying to like put different words into like the blank, and I'm like, how do I do this or this or this or this, and it never works out sometimes to figure it out. So, but yeah, so going back to your actual question before I went off on the tangent, but yeah, I mean, thankfully, and a lot of tools have nice training that they've like, they have their documentation. But then they also have like a training section on their website, which I think is like super vital. And that's something that we've put in at Shipyard since I've joined. Is something that like someone who's completely new to the product, like we have steps for them to take that isn't just them, wildly going through the product. And that's something that we've thought about a lot on our team is, we see a lot of people that like will make an account on Shipyard because we have a free tier for people to use, and they'll come in and they'll like try a few things out and then get lost and then like sign out and never sign back in ever again. And we lose them. And so it's like, how do we as a team at Shipyard, but then like in the industry as a whole, like how do we make those onboarding situations better? And it's like, you have this delicate balance of like, you don't want to be annoying and like make people do things that they don't want to do, because then they might just sign out because they're like, I know what I want to do and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it your way. I'm going to do it my way. Which, I'd like to say that I'm not hard-headed enough to do the same thing, but I know myself and I am. I've done that many times. It's like this product's like popping up and telling me to do this. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do it that way. So it's a delicate balance of that. But then like also like making sure you're showing the necessary steps so you don't get lost, right? Yeah. So it's, I don't know. I going back to the teaching metaphor, something that we always learned in my teaching program was whenever you're teaching a new topic, like the first 2 questions on a worksheet on the topic should be questions that relate to something the kids know. Right.
Okay.
So like we called it giving them a ramp or scaffolding.
Okay.
Right. And so basically, most people, if they can't get past the first step or 2, they will give up and move on because they're like, I'm not going to get this. It's a waste of time. Let's move on. Right. And so something that I try to bring into the space is I'm trying to make sure that I can connect to someone based on something they know. And then after that, I can start teaching new things, right? And so it's about building that scaffolding up or that ramp to allow someone to like take that first step to get there. And then once you take that first step, then you're confident, then you can get in there. And that was something I learned at teaching. My very first lesson that I taught for a grade in college, I was teaching the kids how to solve a system of equations by graphing. And I assumed that they knew that shouldn't have assumed. That's the first thing you should never do. I learned, but I assumed that they had learned how to solve it by just doing the equations. And so my whole lesson was predicated on building off of that knowledge onto this new knowledge. And they didn't know the first part of the knowledge. So my whole lesson just fell apart. The teacher basically just took over and said hey, you're done for the day. This is not it. And I remember, thankfully, because I was brokenhearted because I worked hard on I spent weeks working on that lesson. And I remember my professor set me down and he was like, Steven, why did this fail? And I was like, because they didn't know that. I assumed that I thought they knew that. But it was a very valuable information to learn is, first off, don't assume people know anything, which is a good life lesson to learn in general. But it really is the power of building that scaffolding and that ramping up in the learning space that, if someone gets on your website or is going through your content and the first 5 minutes is something completely new, they're going to tune out. Yep. So you have to connect with them somewhere. You got to connect with people where they are so that you can build them up to something else. And if you don't, they're just going to stay where they are because they're going to feel like they can't get there with you,
So be relatable.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the moral of the story. Yeah. Which is
all right.
Always easier said than done,
Any other last words, recommendations, encouragements?
Yeah, I mean, to people out there that are searching for jobs, especially former teachers, you can always reach out to me, and I'd be happy to help you and provide at least moral support. But I've learned a few things whenever I was applying for jobs. So if that's you and you're applying for jobs in the industry, especially if it's your first job, stick with it. You probably haven't hit as many applications as I did the first time. I legitimately put in at least 100, probably 200 before I even got my first nibble at anyone. So it's a hard process and can be super disheartening. So if that's you, stick with it. There is a light at the end of the tunnel for you. You will find the spot that you should, I don't want to say that you should be in because I don't think that's really true, but you'll find a spot that you'll fit in, to get some experience on that. And as a business note, if all of your data products are disconnected, you should connect them together using an orchestrator tool. Whether that's Shipyard or Airflow or Prefect, you should do that too, because if not, it all falls apart and breaks. As unfortunately I know from my first job where I didn't have anything connected, and everything always fell apart. So
great takeaway. Now you mentioned that people can reach out to you. Where can they find you and follow you?
Yeah, so the best place would be LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me on there and send messages and ask questions. I've met with a few people off LinkedIn that are looking for jobs and, did a resume review and, talked them through interviews and things like that. And, we can, if you want to schedule a time and talk about things like that, I'd be more than happy to provide any kind of knowledge that I have on that. So LinkedIn would be a place. We also ship out a newsletter every week called All Hands on Data. I think Monica will have that in the show notes for you if you'd like to subscribe to that. Going back to learning, a big part of learning and data is just trying to figure out what's happening in the industry at any time, because it's always changing and there's always a new tool out. There's always a new BI tool. There's always a new extraction tool. There's always something new, which is good about the industry because there's always innovation, but it's hard to keep up. So All Hands on Data is an aggregator of newsletters that our team, basically every member of our Shipyard team submits an article once a week with a small blurb on why they liked it. And so basically it's just our favorite article from each week in the data sphere. So that's data engineering, data science, BI analyst, it goes everywhere. So if you'd like to subscribe to that to keep up with your data news, that would be cool as well.
Awesome. I love that. Hashtag continuous learning.
That's right.
Things are constantly changing. You got to keep up somehow.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on the show. And I guess that's a wrap. So as always, folks, happy learning.